Hello guys, I'm 6 and welcome back to a brand new video where today I'm going to be running you down how I claimed my first ever official sim racing championship. This championship would take place on Sim Racing System, aka SRS, and would be yet again another championship hosted by James Tumblety. This time not BTCC cars, however, it would instead be these lovely little cars, the Estonia 25, which is an old Soviet open-wheeler. This car is pretty quirky in the way it drives because it's very lightweight and it doesn't have a lot of power, but it has an absolute motherload of grip in relation to the amount of power the car can put down. So it's pretty much glued to the road at all times, which actually really works for me because it's a car that's really easy to just throw really aggressively into corners, which kind of suits the way I like to drive my cars. But yeah, as per usual, this is an SRS championship, so it's 6 weeks, 6 different tracks, same car, same bunch of people, and first week was at Donington. One key thing to note about the car's default setup, which was a big point of contention before the championship even started, was that the default setup of the car had really bad gear ratios, which meant that the car was about 3 to 4 seconds a lap slower than it actually could be once you set up the gear ratios correctly, because the gear ratios were hilariously long. Albeit, I guess it's probably what you get from putting in a gearbox from a Russian street car. But yeah, so once that was fixed, I actually took a base setup, which I had been pointed to, that fixed all of these issues and gave the car, or made the car handle a lot better, and I put a couple of small tweaks on it just to better suit that to my driving style, and off I went. Right, here we are, ready to start the first round of the season at Donington Park's qualified P6. And one key thing about this car on launch, as you'll see, it bogs down quite a lot in first gear. So people were able to get on top of the bog, were able to get a much better launch time. Like you see that car on the inside absolutely flying. And I lose a few positions here, not ideal. But P6 was still a decent place to start a championship, and this race is a long way to go from this point onwards. However, things wouldn't get better for me. As I'm eyeing up a move down the hill, I am then going to overjudge into this turn here and go off completely wide into the grass. This car actually surprisingly has a good amount of grip still on the grass, even on slick tires, but I took it nice and safe just to make sure I wasn't going to kill anyone, so I lost a whole load of places because of this. However, things would get even worse as there's a huge pile up at the exit of this turn, cars scattering everywhere. I tried my best to get around it, but in the end I get caught up in the accident as well. At this point I am pretty much dead last in this race, but I didn't really get any bad damage from that, and I was pretty confident in this car's pace that I'd be able to maybe try and get back up into the top 10. So, you know, as we can see here, I'm immediately starting to go through and pick off some cars as I'm trying to make my way back up the order. Coming up to the final hairpin for the first time, I'm actually going to get a massive help pick, because as you can see, these cars ahead are all in a bit of a battle. They're all going to start tripping over each other, making a bit of contact here and now. It's going to allow me to pass 1, 2, and 3 cars all at once, which is going to help me out massively later on in terms of position. After the first lap, things have calmed down a little bit, but a few laps later here, I've caught up to these 2 cars and I'm ready to make a pounce on them. And so I'm going to line the car up the inside, and I'm going to breeze past both of these 2. This is a pretty interesting point to note, just how much more speed I had compared to all the cars I was battling down this straightaway. I'm not sure if that's due to the gear ratios or what, but a key point here is actually Phil behind me. Unfortunately, he's going to miss his braking point and give me a little tap on the rear. And that actually brings up another point about this car of how savable it is. I should have been gone in most open wheelers, but I was actually able to get this car back under control without losing too much time, really. See, Max is going to get past me here, but I am right ready to attack him again. I didn't get any major damage from the incident because it wasn't that fast. But, you know, I'm ready here to pounce on him again and reclaim the position in a couple of corners' time. And here we are again, catching up a group of 3 cars into this turn. I'm like tripping over them because I'm just holding that much more speed. And you can see, even with tripping over them and recoiling back, on the exit of this turn, I'm faster than all of them. And so this is kind of when I begin to realize that, you know, there's maybe something here. As I'm actually going to pick up a little penalty here into the chicane by overshooting a little bit. But, you know, I was able to breeze past those 2 cars on that straightaway, despite the fact that I tripped over them on corner entry, so should have realistically have stalled out. But, I mean, even here, you see, I'm able to serve this penalty through this turn. I even bog on the exit, but there's no car challenging me out of that corner from the 2 that I just overtook. So it really did begin to beg the question. Had I not have made those mistakes at the start, which put me down into like the 20-odd places, and had to have fought my way back through the field up until P8, which I'm actually sat in now, chasing down P7, maybe this could actually go somewhere, you know? Unfortunately, I wouldn't know this race because the front field would be miles down the road. As you can see here, I'm reeling in P7, but no other cars to be seen ahead. So I knew I had decent pace to take on these guys on the back of the field. I could comfortably beat them. But could I do it against the big dogs? That was the real question. Because, I mean, as you can see here, just look at the extra speed I've got. I'm able to just pretty much stroll on out of this corner, and it's almost as if I've got DRS. It's just I just walk past him, basically unchallenged. It was kind of a weird, very weird feeling race. I learned a lot here, but it was a very weird feeling race, and this was as high as I would get, obviously, as I said, because there was a massive gap. Unfortunately, those couple of incident points would hurt me. As you can see, and come around the final couple of corners now to finish the race in P7. Yeah, so those incident points would kind of hurt me, as the winner of that race, Lucas, would win the race cleanly, and he would eventually go on to become my championship rival. However, I wouldn't know that at the time, but I'd finish the race, get a nice P7, and see where we could take things next week at Croft. So, taking a look at the championship standings after round 1. Lucas was able to get a clean win, which would net him the full 102 points, solidifying himself as the championship leader after round 1. With me coming home in P7 with a couple incident points, which knocked my total down to 80 points, 22 back. Not in the ideal place you want to start a championship run off with, but as things would have it, Croft would be a bit of a change in fortunes. Now here we are for round 2 at Croft. As you can already see, I did a better job for myself, sticking the car on P4 on the grid. As I get a pretty bad start here. I get a good initial launch, but I bog, which actually is going to allow a car to come up around the outside. It was a pretty bold move, but and then another car, which actually has me drop down into about P6. Not the way I'd want it to start this race, but it could have gone much worse. I was able to start it clean, and I'm immediately sort of looking here to start making back some of those positions. So I'm actually going to go around the outside here into Tower Bend for the first time, and I'm actually going to pull off a around the outside move, covering him off before we've even made the corner apex, which allowed me to move up into P5. Coming into the final complex for the first time. Now, Croft is a track that suits me quite well, so I was kind of had big expectations here, given how Donington went for me last time. And I'm actually going to show some of those intentions by going for a tiny gap here on Phil. It didn't quite work out, but it's actually going to set me up into a really good position to get a good load of slipstream on him down this front straightaway and set up for a move into turn 1, which I'm actually going to be able to execute. Phil is going to give up the space, and I'm going to take the spot, move up into P4. And this is the thing, I didn't want to mess around this race. I was going to make moves. It's only round 2, and I was already on the back foot, so if I was going to make something happen, I had to play aggressive. And it was exactly what I was doing. Jumping forward a little bit, I'd actually worked my way up into P3. As you can see, Lucas in the lead just ahead. Steen, who was in second, had unfortunately spun out of contention. And I was right here, ready to pounce on Yari to make a move into second place. As I'm going to line him up, slipstream, and I'm going to then send it under the brakes into turn 1. And just like with Phil earlier, it actually pays off. I'm going to give him plenty of space on the outside if he wanted to take it, get a little snap of oversteer there, but ultimately I cleared him into the chicane, which allowed me to move up into P2. However, under the brakes into Tower Bend, Phil would come flying past me to retake second place. He'd follow me past Yari and was now coming back to see if he could beat me. I wasn't going to let that stand. As I said, my strategy this race was to play it aggressively. I had to beat Lucas, and as you can see, Lucas was down there in the lead. I had to be the car to beat him if I wanted to stand a chance at getting this title fight off the ground. And I would nearly run into Phil here, because I actually carried a lot more speed than him through, but I had to back out of it. He was able to hold his line pretty well, but you see I'm still attacking. As I wanted to get that second place back, and actually down here he's going to leave the gap open, and I'm going to send it into the hairpin. Nice clean move. Going to cover him off on the exit. Got a little bit of oversteer, which wasn't ideal, but it was now time to hunt down Lucas. And it would happen to pay off. As you can see here, I've really closed the gap down now, and I'm continuing to eat away at that gap ahead. And I realize at this point that the win, it could be mine here. All I've got to do is to get past him, and I would be presented the golden opportunity. As you can see, getting ever closer and closer to that gearbox of his. Coming into the final hairpin, we're going to break in. He's going to run over the curb and catch a lick of oversteer, which is going to give me the run I need on the exit to sweep through, take the lead of the race. And he's not going to be able to do anything about it because he boggled on the exit of the turn. Unfortunately, that would be short-lived. As we come through Tower Bend here with Lucas, you're going to see I'm going to catch a bit of oversteer on the exit, send me wide. That actually gives me a 10-second penalty because Croft here is very strict with its track penalties. This meant that I'd have to serve this before the end of the lap, which meant that the lead was effectively gone. And I would be an idiot and try and serve it here as well. I don't really know what I was thinking. Nearly caused a crash here as I was trying to get the car more to the inside. But as you can see here as well, I'm going to be an extra idiot by hitting the throttle and resetting the timer before the penalty had finished, which allows Phil to streak past into P2, pushing me down into P3, and giving me no chance of coming back. And that was where I'd have to finish the race. Not the result I wanted, but was still a decent result. I just knew next week I had to not let the race win go away if I had the chance to get it. Again, looking at the standings, Lucas would continue his run of domination of the series, picking up his second win in as many races. However, he would pick up an incident point, which helped me out a little bit, as that actually lost him 3 points, which meant that the gap only went up to 26 points rather than 29. I picked up my first podium of the season with a total of 175 points. However, I had a lot of work to do going into round 3 at Ledenon. And well, we would have a rear view camera at the start here at Ledenon, which could only mean one thing, and that was that I bagged pole position. Had never driven this track before. I don't think a lot of people had, which kind of helped balance things out, but I would start P1, Lucas beside me in P2. There would only be 0.04 of a second in it, as we would actually go and make the start here, and I would actually get a really good launch. I had learned how to do the launches a bit better. Lucas get a slightly better run of me, but then eventually stall out, meaning I would clear him into the lead after corner 1, and I would clear enough of a gap that he wouldn't be able to challenge me. This track was going to be incredibly hard to overtake on as well, so pretty much I just had to keep focusing on keeping this pace up throughout the race, and he wouldn't be able to get a shot at overtaking. It was pretty much as simple as that, but easier said than done. This track was very tricky. As you can see, it's very roller coaster like. There's a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of interesting corners, and ultimately was a very tough race. As you can see, look at the speed. I got a lot of understeer there. It's allowed him to close up quite a bit. And we're going to keep sort of trading these blows throughout this first stint of the race. I'm going to pull a bit of a gap on him. He's going to close that gap back up. And that was just kind of how the nature of the race stayed. We weren't able to break away from each other. But we were definitely the two strongest cars on the field. As you can see, he gets very close to making a move here. But I'm just able to keep him behind. As I said, very hard to overtake here. And yeah, that's how it would stay for the first half of the race. And we're back on board with Lucas, which can't mean good things. But we're still really close. We're still battling constantly. He was trying to get past me, and I wasn't letting it happen. However, he would get his way, so I'm going to, unfortunately, just overcook it ever so slightly into this corner. We're just going to have to sweep on by and claim the lead, which now put me back in the spot of trying to attack. However, unfortunately, as much as I tried, due to the nature of this track, it just wasn't going to happen in the end. What didn't help as well was that Phil had kept us pretty close by the whole race, which meant I had to sort of swat him off initially after I'd lost the place, and then had to work on regaining the time back here to Lucas. But in the end, I just wasn't quite able to do it, which is annoying. There was 2 races in a row which I bombed away a win that I potentially could have gotten. This one stung more as I had the pole position. I led half the race, but in the end, it just wasn't to be, which was really damning. And if anything, I was now more looking for just get a win rather than a championship. However, things would change pretty drastically into next round. Looking at the standings once again, Lucas claims his 3rd win in as many races, whilst I had to settle for 2nd in this race. It was my highest finish so far in this season, and it was my 2nd podium in a row, which is promising. However, it did mean that the championship lead grew to about 30 points, which meant that I had a bit of a mountain to climb if I wanted something to happen. However, as I hinted, things were going to change quite a bit going into Daytona in round 4. Now, there's a lot to talk about going into Daytona. Most importantly, was actually that Lucas was going to miss this race. He had a plan, however, and he was going to have a stunt double fill in for him throughout this race, because in SRS you get points for just finishing races, which meant that his championship would still be alive, but he was left ripe for an opportunity for somebody to come along and take a massive swing, and that was exactly my golden opportunity to get back into this thing. After basically seeming out of it, I was only going into this race looking for a win, but now I had ideas of something more. Daytona, though, is a track that suits me pretty well. And this car is a bit of an unconventional pick for Daytona, I must admit, but I was still feeling pretty confident going into this. There's a bit of an interesting setup discrepancy, though, in terms of the final gear ratios on top speed. If you went for a slightly shorter gear ratio, you would be able to hit 132 mile an hour in clean air, but you would stay there. You wouldn't be able to go any faster even in a slipstream, as you'll see here, because that's the gear ratio I chose to run. However, you could go for a slightly longer gear ratio, which would allow you to go up to 138 mile an hour in the slipstream, but in clean air, the car would struggle to hit 130, which meant for the race-winning car, I wanted a car that would be good in clean air, as that was ideally the goal I wanted here, was to break away from the field and try and make sure they couldn't slipstream me. And as you can see here, this is my qualifying run. I actually ended up working really well with Stuart here on the banking section to choreograph this draft. We didn't even communicate this, it just worked out. He was able to back off into the chicane, but he was able to stay close enough that he was able to get a slipstream actually on me out of here. And this lap was pretty phenomenal. We were able to blow the field away. I would cross the line a whole second faster than Stuart did, and he would be sat in 2nd place. Eventually, Mattia would come in to drop that gap down to 7/10, but I still had pole position by 7/10, which meant I had a mad fast car on my hands, and I had a race to go and win. This means obviously the rear wing camera is back for the 2nd race in a row, as I would actually get a really good launch here at Daytona. As you can see, I'm streaking away. Mattia there bogged royally, and he's going to sink back through the field, leaving Stuart and Tim my main rivals as we head down into turn 1. But my launch was really good. So I was able to actually keep them at bay. And crucially, my goal on this first lap was to try and pull away from them. So by the time we exited the infield out onto the banking, they would be far enough back to not be in the slipstream. Which, as you could see here, minute it was going very well, and it actually did pay off. We came out onto the banking. I would have around about a 0.9 second advantage on Stuart and Tim, which meant that they couldn't slipstream me. And I basically just had to keep this up and hope that they wouldn't be able to keep up with me. And well, as it would turn out, the strategy would work perfectly. Stuart and Tim here, as you could see, are very close to each other for second and third. But I'm about 3 seconds down the road at this point. These two did slow each other up a little bit whilst fighting, but even when they weren't fighting, every lap I was etching out a couple of extra attempts on them, slowly building up that lead. And I couldn't have asked for a better race. However, unfortunately, into turn 1, Stuart and Tim would actually have a little bit of a coming together, which would only compound their chances of getting me to 0, as they both spin, allowing Matija, who had actually been picking off the field very well up to this point, to streak on through past them both into second place. And well, as it would turn out in the end here, Matija also wouldn't have anything for me, as he would be 10 seconds behind when he took second place, and that would be a gap that I would actually extend out to about 12 seconds come the end of the race here, which meant I was going on to take my first race win in this series. Finally, after 4 races, I had broken through and managed to put it all together and come out with a very dominant win. And with that absolute crushing win, I would actually swing the championship to 5 points in my favour, which meant that it was now mine to lose. Lucas was still very much in it, he wasn't at it yet, but his stunt double could only manage 16th place in the race, which was last of the running cars. It still netted him a good chunk of points, which obviously allowed him to stay only 5 points behind me, but crucially, he was now no longer the championship leader, as we headed into the most crucial race of the championship at Cadwell Park. So, round 5 here at Cadwell Park, the second to last round of the championship, and it was pretty much where my fate in this championship would be decided. I had to put in a good race here, there was no other option for it. Lucas was back and he is ready to make up for the lost ground from Daytona. Now this track is pretty difficult, it's quite tight as you could see, and there's a lot of elevation changes all the way throughout, which meant that pretty much in qualifying, which is the runs you could see here in the background, it was pretty much going to be front row or bust, in my opinion, in terms of the qualifying results. And so I had to really put it in there and see what I could get out of it. And well, I would succeed in putting the car in the front row. However, not a third pole position in a row. That honour would go to Tim. Lucas, crucially, would be behind me in P3 on the second row. And as we get going here, I actually get a terrible launch. Not only does that cost me a chance to battle for the lead, but also means I fall out of the podium places. However, crucially, as you see, the 2 cars that passed me, neither of those are Lucas. He stays behind me as we run down into turn 1 and clear it through, and I stay in 4th place. It's a very important thing to note that he stays behind me, and that was pretty much my goal in this race, was to keep Lucas behind. Didn't really matter where I finished, however, moving up in the race would help me. As long as Lucas finished behind me though, I would outscore him. I just had to make sure that I didn't pick up any incident points whilst doing so. And just to showcase how tricky this track is, you can see us crawling up the hill here as we come over, and you'll see Tim ahead unfortunately bins it from the lead on the first lap into the wall. And as you see, we also are very cautious over the bump here, and that, again, it just proves how tricky this track was going to be. And if I was going to be able to keep hold of the championship, I had to finish this race without making any crucial mistakes. Now, as you can see here, Stuart and Matija are battling pretty hard for the lead here, as I'm sat in P3, holding back a little bit, just didn't want to get too involved in this, but Stuart gets forced wide, and I see my chance and I go for it. It was a bit of a risky move, but I thought it was probably worth it. And it did pay off. I moved up into second place behind Mattia, and I felt that I had the pace to potentially win this, but I knew I had to plan my moves carefully and not go for any ridiculously bold risks that could result in me getting involved in an incident and potentially losing out on the championship lead. So a couple of laps later at this point, I'm right on Mattia's gearbox, and I actually have a bit of a run on him down here into turn 1. Lucas has also picked off Stewart for P3, meaning that he's behind me, and so I'm going to take a look up the inside here. I have the run, but I back out of it because I didn't want to risk fighting into that turn too hard. However, I set the car up down the hill here, ready to get another run on him, and it ends up working. I'm going to slingshot past him and take the lead of the race, being able to even cover him off by the time we enter the turn up here, which meant that the race lead was now mine. It was now on me to try and build as much of a lead as I could, and hope that even if Lucas was able to get past Mattia, he wouldn't be able to catch me come the end of the race. And well, that plan would work perfectly. Lucas would eventually pass Mattia, but by the time I had pulled around about a 4-second gap on him, and that is pretty much where it stabilized until the end of the race here, which meant I would come home and take my second win in as many races, and would help solidify my status in this championship and give me a legitimate shot going into the final round at Portimao. Looking at the standings here for the second to last time, that win at Cadwell Park pushed me 9 points ahead of Lucas, which meant that, crucially, all I had to do at Portimao to wrap up the championship was to finish at least P3 cleanly, and it would be mine. Lucas, on the other hand, would have to win the race and try and maximize as much as he could, which he would try. However, I would also try and see if I could get a third win in as many races. Here we are for the final round at Portimao. We had a pretty tight battle, me and Lucas did in qualifying. However, he would beat me out by about a tenth or so to pole position. I'd be starting second. However, on the start, I would get a fantastic launch and rocket ahead of Lucas as we run down to turn 1. Notice track 1 isn't very good, so I had to be careful of a couple of things. First one being the pit exit line. A car, unfortunately, behind us fell victim to that and died because there's a weird invisible wall there. And there was also a weird bump here that I caught. That caused me to lose the rear of the car and eventually drop 2 positions down into 3rd place behind Lucas and Phil. And so now I was in the position I had to be in to finish the race, but I now not only had to pull away from the cars behind, but I also wanted to see if I could get past the cars ahead and see if I could win this race. And about a lap or so later, here we are. We're still pretty close, all 3 of us, but Phil, unfortunately, is going to bin it from 2nd place, and it's just going to hand that position to me. And we already streaked away from the rest of the field by a fair margin, which meant that I was pretty comfortable to seal the title. Now I just had to try and work on catch Lucas, but unfortunately that wouldn't work out. He'd eventually pull around about a 7-second gap on me, and I'd have a very comfortable margin back to the rest of the field behind. However, I'd done enough to secure my first ever official sim racing championship. Lucas did all he could to try and take me down. However, we were just that much quicker than the rest of the field, the 2 of us, that it was going to be a very hard ask for him to do much about it unless I had made a mistake. Looking at the standings here for the final time, I would finish the championship with a 5-point advantage over Lucas. He was 575 to his 570. We would both actually score 5 total podiums throughout the series, meaning that we'd only missed the podium in 1 single race. For me, that was at Donington, the first round of the championship. Every round since then, I stood on the podium. And for Lucas, that was that 16th place at Daytona, which was his ultimate massive cost in his championship. As besides that, he had scored 4 wins in that season compared to my 2. And it does kind of sour it a little bit, as it's not really the way you'd want to win a championship, but at the end of the day, it is something you gotta be in it to win it. And I thought this was an interesting story to tell still, because it was a very fun championship, and you know, being given the golden opportunity that I was at Daytona, it was still fully possible that I could have blown it all at Cadwell Park, and I still could have blown it at Portimao. But even with Lucas back in the frame, I did what I needed to do at Cadwell, which set me up in a perfect spot to be able to take a bit of a swing, or to be able to tank a bit of a swing at Portimao, and still come out on top of it all at the end of the day. But yeah, you know, as I said, it's not really the way I wanted to win it, but I'm not going to say that I didn't really deserve it. Lucas did deserve it more in the end, I would have said, but I think if we were to pick anyone out of the series to win the championship, it was one of us two, because we were just the top two drivers in that series. Were it not for his mishap at Daytona, or well, missing the race at Daytona, he definitely would have come away with a pretty comfortable championship win. And I would have finished second, and I wouldn't have been mad about that at all. But, you know, that's racing at the end of the day. Things happen. It doesn't always go your way. And hopefully, this is the first of many championships. But we'll have to wait and see on that front. So, if you did enjoy this pretty lengthy video, like I appreciate it. If you're new, subscribe, very appreciate as well. And I guess that's it for now. Goodbye.